A young man is transported to another fantasy world, and despite the differences, he begins to notice strange and mysterious similarities between the two worlds. Determined to uncover the truth, he decides to explore this new world and become its strongest adventurer. The story begins with a nobleman named Lysel wandering the corners of this kingdom, although he does not know where he is. He walks through it, searching for anything familiar. He arrives at the market, and as he strolls through it, everyone turns to look at him. He is truly eye-catching, for it is strange for a noble to appear here, yet he walks among them without fear. During his walk, he approaches a vendor and examines the coins in his hand, surprised because he has never seen such currency before. Above all, he knows nothing about this country, nor did he realize it was this large. Nevertheless, he continues his tour. On his way, he finds a group of armed mercenaries talking about a labyrinth, which puzzles him as he sees no signs of an imminent war here. He decides to continue on his path because he needs information, but first and foremost, he needs money. He arrives at a shop and enters, shocking the shopkeeper, who wonders what brought a nobleman like him to such a place. The shopkeeper welcomes him, and Lysel informs him that he has something to sell, producing a sword for the shopkeeper to appraise. While the appraisal is taking place, Lysel wanders around the shop and finds a map. He studies it to learn something about this country, but he does not recognize this land at all. He becomes certain that something is wrong with this place. We then return to the shopkeeper appraising the sword. He finds its ornamentation extremely beautiful and notes he has never seen such a design before. Lysel asks for its value, and the shopkeeper buys it for 200 gold pieces. Lysel asks to include the map along with the gold coins, and the shopkeeper agrees. The shopkeeper then offers him a choice of bags to put the gold coins in, and Lysel selects one. As the shopkeeper places the gold inside, Lysel finds the bags strange. The shopkeeper explains that these bags are enchanted with spatial magic, allowing him to put anything he wants inside. After that, Lysel goes out into the country and continues walking. He finds the climate mild and the city vibrant. It resembles the country he hails from, and this resemblance gives him a terrible feeling. However, he still needs more information and a companion to assist him, someone smart enough to understand his intentions. He doesn't know how he will achieve this, but he knows he must be cautious about revealing his identity. When he enters an alley, he senses someone behind him named Gil. Lysel asks if he wants something, and Gil warns him, telling him there are bad men down that road and he shouldn't go that way. Lysel thanks him and tosses him a gold coin. Gil doesn't understand what he wants or who he is, so Lysel introduces himself and tells him he needs to speak with him urgently. Gil takes him to a tavern so they can talk comfortably. Lysel asks him to state his name and anything about himself, whether his work or his past. Gil explains that he is a solo adventurer ranked B, has no girlfriend, and no intention of being in a relationship. Lysel reflects on his words about being an adventurer, realizing that the people he saw in the city were adventurers like him. Gil continues, stating that he is the only B-rank adventurer in this country. He waits for Lysel to be surprised, but the opposite happens. He shows no reaction. Gil becomes suspicious of him. He's either a very great figure or a noble completely ignorant of everything. Regardless, Gil cannot read his expression at all. Lysel informs him that he has no profession and nothing to prove his social status, so he has no standing. Gil doesn't believe him at all, but he doesn't suspect him of ill intent. Afterward, Lysel opens the map and asks him to explain the state of the country first. Gil answers that they are currently in Partida, the royal capital. He then points out the country of Marcade, which is the nation of trade, and introduces him to the country of Kavana, the nation of magical raw minerals. He continues, explaining that the nation of trade and the nation of magical minerals fought a war in the past, but the situation has calmed down recently. Lysel understands that the name of the trade nation reflects its nature, but he doesn't know if the nation of magical minerals implies a country rich in resources located next to a huge mine or not. He then asks Gil for his opinion on Partida. Gil describes the country as having good hotels, excellent food, and acceptable jobs, calling it a comfortable city for adventurers. Lysel thinks to himself for a moment that this country must attract many visitors, and perhaps he can meet all kinds of people here. Lysel asks Gil to accompany him to show him the city, protect him from anything, and act as his hospitable adventurer companion. Gil tells him that he is being very rude for making all these requests, noting that Lysel has been steering the conversation in this direction from the very beginning. Lysel then explains the details to him, saying, "We will travel together for 1 month, and you will teach me how things work. After that, we won't meet unless necessary. I will pay you whatever you want, though I don't know the value of your services." Afterward, they go to the room together, and Gil tells Lysel, "I booked the room next to mine for you." Lysel thanks him, saying, "I didn't have a place to sleep until now. I will tell you the truth now. I came to this completely unknown country by chance, or perhaps by someone's design. I was speaking with my subordinate in my room, and suddenly I found myself standing in an alley in this country. I looked around and it wasn't much different from my own country, so I felt something strange, as if the entire world had shifted slightly from its natural state. If you don't believe me, our conversation ends here. Gil tells him to keep talking, adding that if he were lying, it was a terrible lie. He wants him to introduce himself properly. Lae'zel continues, saying, "I have been active in my position recently, but I am a duke. I identified myself as a royal advisor who worked at the palace. My king is wonderful, despite his young age. No one ever forced me to abandon my position. I am proud to serve him. If my absence poses a problem, I'm confident they will find a way to bring me back. But I doubt I'm capable of doing so alone. That sort of task is the king's specialty. Until then, I'll consider this period a vacation and enjoy it." The next day, Lae'zel wakes up and goes to Gil, telling him that he wants to become an adventurer. Gil informs him that they must go to a clothing store first, as his current appearance attracts too much attention. After that, we find them at the Adventurers Guild. Gil explains to Lae'zel that adventurers are simply people who perform various tasks for others, and the Adventurers Guild acts as an intermediary for these tasks. They approach a young receptionist, but he tells them that the guild master is not present at the moment, and that they should come back another day. He adds that nothing can be registered, explaining we sometimes face interference from nations due to our independent status. Therefore, we do not register nobles, knights, or those of similar standing as adventurers here. Please leave now. Gil tells him that Lae'zel isn't a nobleman. He simply wants to register to become an adventurer. The guild employee then agrees and goes to prepare the necessary tools. Lae'zel and Gil went to the Adventurers Guild for Lae'zel to join. Stad, the receptionist, began collecting Lae'zel's information for registration and issued him a guild card. He asked Lae'zel to prick his finger for the card, and shortly after, Stad informed him that the guild card was ready. Stad then began explaining the ranking system mechanism. He informed Lae'zel that the guild lends out encyclopedias containing information about monsters and plants he might encounter during his tasks, adding that he could ask if anything was unclear. Lae'zel asked if these encyclopedias were for sale. Stad explained that viewing them is free, but removing any guild documents is not permitted. However, Stad gave him the location of a store that sells technical books on various subjects, not just monsters and plants. Lae'zel thanked him and left with Gil. 3 days later, Lae'zel was reading through the encyclopedias when Gil approached him. Lae'zel asked Gil about the status of his mission, and Gil replied that it wasn't bad. Holding one of Lae'zel's books, Gil compared Lae'zel to a fish swimming in oceans of books devouring knowledge. Lae'zel informed him that it was time for lunch and that he would go to the guild afterwards because he had a new task. Lae'zel and Gil then went to the guild to complete the orientation and accept a new mission. Then, an individual arrived who had wanted to join the Adventurers Guild but was rejected. Having heard that the famous One Blade was partnering with someone, he expressed his resentment that he was rejected for a partnership while the guild accepted a beginner working with him. Lae'zel told him that there was a formal agreement between him and Gil to work together. The man retorted that Lae'zel thought he was special just because he bought One Blade with money, insisting that Gil doesn't work for money. Lae'zel replied that if he truly believed Gil could be bought with money, he should try buying him with an amount exceeding what Lae'zel paid. The man replied that he was a B rank just like the man Lae'zel bought. Lae'zel told him that hearing a nobody like him compare himself to something belonging to Lae'zel was utterly disgusting. The man then initiated a fight with Lae'zel, but Gil defended him and defeated the man. Stad started to intervene, but Lae'zel reminded him that guild employees are not allowed to interfere in disputes between adventurers. Stad informed him that he could intervene if requested. Lae'zel thanked him, noting that Stad was worried about him facing a penalty. He then gave Stad money to repair the damages and stated he would return another day to take a mission. The scene shifts to Gil in his room, telling himself that in that moment his body moved instinctively, as if Lae'zel had made him his knight. And that ends today's episode. To watch more episodes, please subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button to receive all the latest updates.
The episode begins with Lae'zel meeting Gil at a restaurant for breakfast. They notice that the food tastes completely different from what was served in Lae'zel's previous world, though he finds both to be luxurious. Lae'zel remarks that he is enjoying this time because he is technically on vacation. Suddenly, a captain enters the restaurant and informs the waitress that they received a report about a man impersonating a noble staying there. The waitress becomes angry at the accusation against her guests, but the captain insists on passing through to verify the situation. Upon seeing Lae'zel, the captain freezes in his tracks and immediately apologizes, explaining that he had been told there were no nobles in the city. Lae'zel tells him that he isn't a noble, but rather an ordinary adventurer. However, the captain does not believe him. The scene shifts to Lae'zel and Gil in a forest, where Lae'zel thanks Gil for helping him reach the location. Gil asks him to adjust his way of speaking, as adventurers don't talk like that. Lae'zel then asks Gil to teach him more. Gil looks away and spots a giant rat. informing Lizzle that their mission for the day is to eliminate 10 of them. He warns Lizzle that they flee quickly, so they must be killed fast. Before Gil can finish speaking, Lizzle uses magic to summon a gun and shoots the small monster. Gil is surprised because guns in this world typically use metal bullets and are considered impractical, so no one uses them. Lizzle demonstrates how his gun works, firing magical energy instead of bullets, and proceeds to kill several giant rats with it. Afterward, they head to the Adventurers Guild to find another mission. Lizzle finds a quest to collect items from a labyrinth, noting that items are found up to the 5th floor and the base reward is 10 silver coins. Gil decides that the 5th floor suits their rank and the pay is good, so they accept the quest. They go to Stad, the receptionist, to register. When asked if any item is acceptable, Stad confirms that he doesn't mind what it is, as long as it comes from within the labyrinth. Lizzle asks about a group of people sitting nearby. Stad explains that a new labyrinth was discovered a few days ago, and those adventurers are likely working on it. The labyrinth is difficult, so their research is taking a long time. Gil is surprised by how silently they are working. Stad explains that the issue isn't the monsters, but the puzzles within the labyrinth. They are extremely difficult, so the adventurers copy them down and try enthusiastically to solve them. They are chasing the completion prize, a reward for the first to clear the labyrinth, which also boosts their adventurer ranking. Because of this, there is a severe shortage of people doing regular quests, as everyone prioritizes the labyrinths, especially when a new one is discovered. Stad suggests that if they are heading that way, they can look at a nearby table where a copy of the first cipher is displayed. Lizzle considers this, but Gil insists they stick to the quest they already accepted. As they leave, Gil notices Lizel's curiosity about the cipher and agrees to let him take a quick look. Lizzle approaches an adventurer and asks to see the puzzle, but the adventurer flips the paper over to hide it. However, Lizzle manages to glimpse the content and finds an interesting, well-crafted cipher consisting of numbers in an ancient script with a fascinating sequence. He quickly returns to Gil. As they walk, Lizzle ponders the ancient script. He is familiar with it and wonders if this world is his past or future, feeling compelled to solve the mystery. Gil warns him not to meddle in affairs that don't concern him to avoid trouble, but Lizzle doesn't listen. They arrive at the labyrinth for their assigned mission and enter to collect items. Finding items isn't guaranteed, it's entirely random and based on luck, so they have no choice but to walk around and search. It is noted that there is a boss on the lower floor, though not a particularly strong one. Suddenly, arrows are fired at Lizzle, but Gil saves him at the last moment. Lizzle is surprised that the arrow was aimed directly at him. He thanks Gil, but is puzzled by the event. Gil scolds him, telling him to ensure he can handle such traps, noting that Lizzle had let his guard down simply because Gil was there. They proceed to the 2nd floor to continue their search and find a chest. Lizzle approaches it cautiously, aware that it might contain monsters. The scene then shifts to Lizzle and Gil visiting a merchant to appraise the items they retrieved from the labyrinth. Guido asks them, "How may I help you today?" Lizzle replies that he is an adventurer and wants to appraise some goods from the labyrinth. He places two dolls in front of Guido and asks if they are worth a full gold coin. Guido informs him that some collectors might pay 5 gold coins for them. He explains that there are many people who collect cloth labyrinth dolls. Usually, they sell for 2 gold coins or 5 for a pair. However, strictly classified as labyrinth goods, they are low grade and essentially worthless. Though Guido adds that he is willing to buy them if they wish. Lizzle declines the sale, stating, "No, please just appraise them as labyrinth goods." Lizzle then asks Guido to box and wrap the dolls since they are made of cloth, adding, "If you have a red ribbon, please use it, I like that." He remarks that he puts effort into worthless things purely for the fun of it. The scene shifts to Gil asking Lizzle about the young team they saw that morning. Gil notes, "I don't know much about them, but they are rank C. It will take them some time to reach rank B." Lizzle replies, "Yes, they were discussing the cipher at the guild. I don't need anything from rank B adventurers, but I prefer investing in someone with a bright future." The team then approaches Gil and Lizzle to introduce themselves. The first person introduces himself as Ain, the team leader. He says, "Thanks to your advice this morning, we are currently in the lead in the labyrinth. However, we have a proposal. We are stuck again and need your help." Lizzle congratulates them, saying he hopes they will be the first to reach the final chamber. He agrees to help them in exchange for 50% of the completion reward. Ain gets angry at the price. Lizzle asks him, "If I solve the puzzles and you reach the bottom thanks to me, do you think simply saying thanks, we're done with you, would be enough?" "I think you are mistaken about something. Do you realize you are not in a position to negotiate? I could just go to the labyrinth myself tomorrow." Flustered, Ain says, "Let me rephrase. We want the honor of being the first to clear the dungeon. We will pay you 50%. Or rather, let us keep 50% of the reward. Please, we must be the first to clear it. We need your help." He rejoices greatly when Lizzle agrees. The next day, Lizzle is seen sleeping and appears to be sick. Ain enters and hands Lizzle a paper with the puzzle, saying, "You could have stopped by yesterday on your way back." Ain explains that they put in a huge effort yesterday. The new floor was a massive maze, and they advanced alone until late at night, facing a huge number of monsters. Lizzle looks at the problem and says there are 10 doors. Enter the second door from the left, then the 5th, then the 8th. The scene moves to the Adventurers Guild. Lizzle notes, we haven't found any escort missions yet. There are missions designated for rank C, but combat skill alone isn't enough. Stad then approaches them and informs them that the client from the other day requested to meet them. The client liked the goods and wanted to thank Lizzle personally, so they go with Stad. Gil asks Lizzle, did you know they were important and hope for this to happen? Lizzle replies, no, but something seems strange. Collectors usually seek attention, but these didn't mention their names. Lizzle talks to Gil, remarking, collectors usually seek attention, yet they didn't mention their names. Furthermore, they offered 10 silver coins regardless of what we brought back. Just then, Ray approaches them and says, sorry for keeping you waiting. He asks, did I enter the wrong room? The guard corrects him, saying, this is the correct room. Please enter quickly. Lizzle greets him, introduces himself, and explains that he is the one who procured the goods. Surprised, Ray remarks, I didn't expect an adventurer like you. Please excuse me, I didn't mean to offend. Lizzle replies, I get that a lot. It's fine. They sit at the table to have tea. Ray tells him, you can call me Ray, and introduces himself as a viscount in charge of the military police administration. He adds, adventurers probably don't like me very much. Now, let's get to the main topic. Lizzle asks, I came here regarding that mission. Did I make a mistake? Ray replies, not at all. That packaging and those goods brought me a joy I haven't felt in a long time. I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart and apologize, as it seems I paid less than necessary for those goods. Lizzle assures him that the payment covered the cost of wrapping and more. Ray counters, rather, it is payment for the joy you gave me. However, that is just an excuse. If you were the one who did that exquisite wrapping, you must know the true value of those dolls. Lizzle responds, I assure you, they were appraised accurately. Ray insists, but that doesn't reflect the whole truth. Lizzle thanks him, and Ray asks if they can become friends. Lizzle replies, it would be an honor, but I am just a beginner, an F-rank adventurer. Ray explains, I felt it would be wise to build a personal relationship. That is what my intuition tells me. Do you trust me? Lizzle replies, if you think so, I won't oppose you. Ray then invites them to visit sometime, saying, I would like to show you my collection. Now, please excuse me. After Ray leaves, Lizzle says to Gil, I think the suspicions about me are gone now. Gil asks, what makes you think that? Lizzle replies, he checked my status magic before he left, didn't he? Gil notes, it's unlikely you could have deceived him completely. The scene shifts to Ray talking to himself. He didn't seem annoyed, but there was a hint of caution towards me. I'll start by building a friendship. Later, Lizzle tells Gil, I'm glad Ain's team successfully cleared the Labyrinth. Gil replies, and you made a good profit as well. Lizzle asks, was the reward large? Gil answers, a set of high-ranking equipment. They will use it all. It's not enough if they intend to advance further. Lizzle asks, why are you only rank B? You could reach a higher rank, couldn't you? Gil answers, I am a solo adventurer. This is the limit of what is possible. Lizzle asks, what is the real truth? If that were the only reason, I couldn't trust the guild. Gil explains, at rank and above, special missions come in sometimes. Lizzle responds, you mean missions from nobles and wealthy merchants? Gil says, I have no patience for protocols, and I'm not interested in dealing with people like that. Lizzle then hands him money, thanking him for the past month, noting that he wasn't able to spend everything he had. Gil replies, you made a fortune at the last minute. This is too much. Lizzle says, it's a token of my gratitude. I also want to offer an advance booking. If something happens later, will you help me? Gil grabs Lizzle's hand tightly. Lizzle says, that hurts. Don't force me to issue an order to you. I don't want to bind you. Gil then grabs him by the collar and says, I don't want to hear your opinion on my decisions. He tosses the money and adds, don't bore me. Lizzle replies, I'll make sure not to disappoint you. And so, today's episode comes to an end. If you liked the video, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to receive all the new updates.
A boy is transported to another world full of magic and is reincarnated as the fourth son of a noble family. However, when his parents discover that his magical rank is weak, they cast him out and sent him to another city. But this child is a miracle. He possesses a very special kind of magic and eventually becomes the strongest magician in the city. Our story begins with our hero telling us that he was transported to another world after his boring routine life. This is Van. He wakes up and runs quickly, but his maid chases after him, crying out, Master, that's very dangerous. The place is unsafe. Please don't look down from there. He was only 2 years old and remarkably short, so much so that the maid was astonished, asking, how did you learn those words when you were still so young? She doesn't realize that he has been reincarnated into this body, so he actually knows everything. They begin to get to know one another. Her name is Till, his personal maid. She was delighted with him because he could pronounce names with such ease. As for his family, his father is the Marquis Furtio. His siblings are Mauricia, Yard, and Sesto. The scene shifts to lunchtime. We see his father and everyone seated at the table. While the maids feed him, Van speaks to himself internally, acknowledging that he was transported to this world in a new identity, but has kept his memories from Japan. Essentially, he was originally a Japanese boy. His father asks, "What will you study today, Yard?" Yard, Van's brother, replies, "Yes, father. Today I will learn fire magic and powerful combat tactics." Then, Sesto is asked what he will do. He replies that he will study wind magic. The same question is then directed to Van. However, there are still many things Van is ignorant about, so he decides to start by studying the culture and history of their nation first. His father laughed at him, thinking he had spoiled him too much since he is the last child of his late wife, Mira. Nevertheless, he acknowledges that Van is a bright boy, even at just 2 years old. He is certain that he will possess powerful fire magic, just like himself and Mira, and that the future of the Furtio family is secure. He looks forward to the magical aptitude assessment when Van turns 8. Van realizes then that magical aptitude is crucial in this world. Its offensive capabilities make it useful for protecting people. Nobles desire one of the 4 basic elements: fire, water, wind, or earth. Possessing an aptitude for any other type of magic is considered a disgrace. Van looks at his father and brothers, noting that they all possess one of these 4 basic elements. Later, Van goes to his room with his maid, Till. He reads books and learns that there is only one port from which ships set sail. This is because giant monsters hide in the depths of the sea, and if ships were to sail from anywhere else, they would be attacked. He doesn't know much about the races in their country, so Till explains that there are many different races, such as elves and dwarfs. Another maid interrupts, suggesting this might be too complicated for little Van, but Van asks her to continue because he wants to learn more. He also expresses interest in learning about magic tools. The maids sit down with him and explain that magic crystals, certain gems, rocks, and metals can store magic. Therefore, he can create magic tools linked to his specific magical aptitude. At that moment, the head butler, Espada, enters. He has been a talented servant of Van's father for many years. He places a stack of books in front of Van. He knows Van is 2 years old and learning to read and do basic math, but he doesn't know the extent of his knowledge. Van tells him his reading isn't very good and he can only do a little addition and subtraction. Espada gives him a math problem to solve, but Van solves it incorrectly, perhaps intentionally. Espada decides to become his tutor from now on. Van is terrified of him, but thanks to Espada's lessons, Van masters reading and writing within a few days. He spends the next 2 years studying from dawn till dusk. By the time Van turns 4, we see him training with Till. She defeats him, and Van becomes very sad. One of the other maids scolds Till, warning her not to insult their master if she values her life. She asks Van to punish Till. Van refuses, but the maid insists, explaining that treating a noble rudely is a major crime. To resolve the issue, Van tops Till very lightly on the head. After that, Van begins studying swordsmanship daily. By the time Van turned 5, he was capable of fighting on equal footing with older trainee soldiers. Since he was facing children, he wins easily, as his past life gave him plenty of experience. Although Van defeated many children, he talks to them kindly despite their lower status, unlike his brothers Yard and Sesta. Later, Van sits down to rest from training. At that moment, Dee, the vice commander of the honor guard, approaches him. He asks Van to show him his hands. When Dee looks, he finds no scars, and the skin is still soft. This confuses him because he heard Mr. Espada orders Van to study 3 times the usual amount. Van suddenly bursts into tears, complaining that Mr. Espada makes him study from morning till night. Dee suggests that he follow the path of the sword, claiming it will make him the greatest swordsman in the country. Van thinks for a moment. He loves the sword, but he also loves studying, so he decides to do his best in both. Seeing Van's agreement, Dee decides to teach him swordsmanship personally. However, he promises to teach him gently since he is still just a child. We then see Van beginning his training with Dee. We see Dee training Van day and night in swordsmanship so that he can master it. Dee also wants to teach him to sit and rest in a squatting position instead of using a chair, a rougher style. Till comes to assist him. Van thinks to himself, despite all the hardship, every day has been enjoyable since I came here. I feel a sense of fulfillment I never experienced in my previous life. I want to enjoy this pleasant life in this world to the fullest. However, Van reflects that by the time he turned 6, though he had become a genius, he was now enduring a daily hell with his studies and sword training. Every day was exactly the same, and it was starting to become more than he could handle. He realized that if things continued this way, he wouldn't be able to enjoy his new life. He begs Till to let him go out and play. He wants to visit the market. Indeed, they go to the market, and Van decides to live like a normal child for the day. Van is dazzled by the place as it is bustling with vitality. It is the largest market in the city. Till shows him around, introducing him to the Merry Trading Company. It is a massive corporation with branches all over the kingdom. It's enormous, resembling Costco. Later, they see an old man with a young boy who is tied up and clearly shows signs of torture. Van asks, what happened to this boy? The old man replies, this is my son and I can do whatever I want with him. I came here to sell him as a slave. Till explains to Van that poor families often sell the children they cannot feed into slavery so they can earn money to survive. Suddenly, Rosalie appears. She's delighted to find Van in front of the company and tells him that they have everything he needs, offering to serve him in any way possible. Van asks her about the value of the boy being sold. The old man reveals that the boy possesses theft magic. However, when the old man learns they won't pay more than 3 silver coins, he begins to beat the boy severely. Van intervenes, saying, I will take him for 5 silver coins. He takes the boy and the old man leaves. Afterwards, Van helps the boy and they get to know one another. Van treats him as an equal, not as a slave. Van wants the boy to come with him, but he realizes that his father, the Marquis, would never allow a child of unknown origin into the mansion. However, the situation would be different if the boy entered as a slave. Van agrees to this arrangement, and the boy, whose name is Kamsin, agrees as well. They then go together to buy him some clothes. However, in this situation, they must finalize a slave contract. Rosalie extends her hands to Kamsin and Van and applies the slave seal, which remains in effect unless the contract is cancelled. Since this is their first time doing business together, she waives the contract fees. Van thanks her, leaving Rosalie in shock. She can hardly believe a noble thanked her. The scene shifts to Van eating a meal. Kamsin enters and warns him that Vice Commander D is looking for him. Van offers Kamsin some food as a bribe if he tells D he isn't there. Van notices Kamsin isn't wearing gloves and asks why. Kamsin says he doesn't need them, but Van points out that it might be uncomfortable to show the slave seal openly. Kamsin replies that the seal symbolizes the bond between him and Van, so he likes showing it. However, Van buys him gloves and Kamsin puts them on. Vice Commander D arrives, demanding to see Van. He knows Van is inside because a maid saw him enter. Kamsin tries to block D from entering, claiming the person who saw Van was just having hallucinations born of their intense feelings for Master Van. D asks Kamsin about the crumbs around his mouth. Kamsin wipes his mouth and claims there is nothing there. D immediately realizes this is a bribe from Van and notes the audacity of ignoring a Vice Commander's order. Kamsin retorts that he is Master Van's slave and follows his orders. D calls this act brave on Kamsin's part. He decides that since Kamsin has such guts, he will train him instead of Master Van. D grabs Kamsin and drags him away. The scene shifts to the market, where people are whispering that Master Van has turned 8 years old. This means it is time for his magical aptitude assessment. The townspeople hope Van will become the next ruler because he governs with kindness and plays with the children. They note that all the children of the Ferdio family usually possess an aptitude for fire or wind magic. We then see the father, Marquis Ferdio, with his sons. The Marquis informs them that Van possesses no aptitude for any of the 4 basic elements. Worse, his aptitude is for production magic. Production magic is known as the most pathetic type because it only allows the user to create items like swords and jewelry by preparing materials, things that can be made without magic. The Marquis asks how could Van possibly defend their people with such magic. He laments that his late wife, Mira, was a powerful fire mage, and he is too, so how did they produce a production mage? The father calls himself a fool for pinning his hopes on Van after seeing his rare intelligence at a young age. He declares he cannot believe the family produced a failure like Van. Enraged, the father tries to draw his sword on Van, but Mauricia stops him. Mauricia suggests a solution. There is a remote village that hasn't developed due to its location, even though it's part of our domain. Why not give it to Van? He explains that the village has a population of barely over 100 and produces nothing special. The northern mountains are overrun by monsters, and it borders the territory of Verdonado and the rival kingdom Yelenita. Currently, it serves as nothing more than a rare training camp. The Marquis understands Mauricia's implication. It is a new territory with little loyalty to the main house. The Marquis tells Van he will become the Lord of Dot Village. He tells Mauricia he found a use for the useless Van, and then leaves. Mauricia apologizes to Van, explaining he couldn't bear to see him get hurt, so he made the hasty proposal. Van thanks him, saying he's grateful. Later, Till comforts Van, telling him he is a dignified and upright noble without magic, and sending him to such a remote village is terrible. Van thanks her for her concern, but secretly, he is actually looking forward to it. He thinks that a lord of a rural village won't have many duties, so he'll finally have free time. Luggage is loaded onto carriages. Van is not allowed to take any honor knights with him. Instead, he has about 10 adventurers hired by Mauricia. Initially, he was only allowed to take Kamsin, but Espada appears and tells Van he will come along to supervise his studies as a form of amusement for his old age. Van then takes Till as well.
Till asks Van if something good happened because he's smiling. He tells her he's just anxious about going to the border. The carriage begins to move. It does not bear the Marquis's crest because his father wanted to send him away quietly. However, the Marquis held a departure ceremony to make the banishment look official and majestic. As they leave, the people of the city gathered to bid Van a heartfelt farewell. And so ends the first episode. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more content, and see you next week with more of this anime. Goodbye.
Our episode today begins with Van and his friends inside the carriage. He uses his production magic to transform a wooden stick in his hand into a knife, hoping it will be a useful tool to benefit from. He then informs the group that they are close to arriving at the village. He tells Kamsen that if he does not feel comfortable there, he can return to the Marquis's palace, as Van can release him from his slave contract. He adds that if Kamsen speaks to his brother Morskia, he will ensure he is treated well. However, Kamsen objects, stating that he has decided to dedicate his life to protecting Van from any danger and will always remain by his side. Van is overjoyed to find someone who loves him to such a degree. Suddenly, the carriage comes to a halt. Commander informs them that the village is under attack. They all disembark, and Van realizes that while the village is surrounded by a wooden fence, it is useless against the arrows fired by the enemy, forcing the villagers to maintain a slow, turtle-like defense. The enemy numbers approximately 50, outnumbering the soldiers accompanying Van. Commander D asks to join the battle, but the adventurer Ortho objects, arguing that their numbers are too few and they will be defeated. D replies that he is aware of the danger and the heavy losses they might suffer, but insists they will eventually succeed in driving out the enemy. Ortho counters that they were tasked with only one mission to ensure the boy Van reaches the village safely, and he will not agree to a battle that will get everyone killed. D tells him not to speak nonsense, declaring that this village is their master's first territory and its people are his first subjects. If they do not protect them when they are in danger, what purpose do they serve? He then asks the adventurers not to join him in the main battle, but to focus solely on protecting Master Van. Ortho agrees to this arrangement. However, Commander Sparta objects, reasoning that if Commander D dies, the village will have no future, even if they save it from the current attack. Sparta reveals that he is a mage and they can rely on him. He proposes a plan. He will first erect a defensive wall, and then the adventurers will launch attacks from a distance. When the enemy becomes distracted by this, Commander D and his men will attack from the flank, using a series of surprise attacks to increase their chances of victory. However, Van objects, refusing to accept a plan that endangers Sparta's life, deciding that he will never expose any of them to danger. Van announces that he will act as the bait himself. Everyone is shocked and immediately refuses. Teal offers to take the role instead, and Kamsen offers the same, but Van insists he does not want anyone dear to him to face danger. Van declares he will charge directly with the carriage, while the others attack from the sides. He draws his sword and says, "Even if I die, what better ending is there than the death of a ruler for the sake of his people? And it does not matter if you leave my corpse behind. Announcing my death would only cause problems for our family anyway." Commander Ortho then recalls a moment when he was sitting with friends, mentioning his mission to protect Prince Van. Van had come to thank him, and after Van left, the friends had mocked the boy as useless. Returning to reality, Ortho approaches Van and tells him that while they all entrust their lives to him, he will not allow a small child to be endangered. Pluriel and the other knights agree, affirming their readiness to protect Van with their lives. They decide to execute Sparta's plan. Sparta creates a defensive wall, and the group launches arrows from behind it. The enemy is surprised by the sudden appearance of the barrier and charges to attack. Seizing the moment, Commander D's men attack from the left and Ortho's men from the right, successfully ambushing and eliminating the enemies who had swallowed the bait. The enemy is then surrounded from all sides, and Ortho and his men begin to eliminate them. Fear strikes the remaining enemies, causing them to flee in different directions, drastically reducing their numbers, a turn of events that greatly favors the adventurers. Deciding to change tactics, the enemy leader targets the other side of the wall. Pluriel attempts to stop him, but hesitates out of fear. Seizing the opening, Van strikes him from behind, followed by Kamsen, who delivers a finishing blow to his chest with his sword. Van then orders everyone to stay focused on what is ahead, as the enemy will likely concentrate their efforts on them. Ultimately, the battle ends in a decisive victory for Van and his group, achieving the best possible outcome while inflicting heavy losses on the enemy. Despite the victory, Ortho remains deep in thought regarding the boy Van. He begins to feel a sense of curiosity toward him, although there might not be much money in it. He suggests to his team that they stay with Van for a while. While some of his men apologize and leave to complete other missions, the rest decide to remain with Ortho. Van saved their lives, and they feel obligated to repay the favor, even though it is hard for them to believe that a child rumored to be not yet 10 years old moves with such skill. They find him kinder than any noble they have ever known. Consequently, they all want to witness how this land will develop under his leadership and decide to stay and assist him. The scene shifts to Van and Teal, where she is screaming at him for endangering his life again. She insists that next time, she should be the one to risk her life first. Van agrees to her condition, but she continues to scold him, desperate. Van asks Kamsen to help save him from her wrath. Just then, D and his men arrive to congratulate Van on the great victory. At that moment, Sparta notices that the villagers have gathered at the entrance. Van decides they should enter the village with pride to greet the people. Upon entering, they find the village more spacious than expected, though it is in in very poor condition. Van speaks to the villagers, introducing himself as their new lord. The village chief, a man named Rhonda, steps forward to thank him for saving the village, noting that they have been attacked multiple times this year alone. Van is surprised that the village is targeted so frequently. Rhonda explains that knights used to guard the area when it was part of the Verdinano territory, but that protection ended when the village was incorporated into the Furcio territory, threatening their survival. Van apologizes to the chief, admitting that his father, Marquis Furcio, was unaware of the small village's situation. The chief becomes upset, interpreting this to mean that small villages with negligible tax contributions are deemed unworthy of protection. Van asks him not to complain about the state of the kingdom, as it won't help them. He acknowledges that the nobles bear great responsibility, and that the flaws in the laws enacted by the kingdom as founders, the House of Labyrinth, are the root cause. But they cannot change the laws. Instead, they must find a way to secure the village's safety. He proposes a 3-step plan. First, produce something valuable so the kingdom cannot ignore the village. Second, earn enough money to regularly hire mercenaries. And third, improve and develop the village themselves. A woman retorts that they had thought of these solutions too, but execution is harder than theory. Van encourages her, promising to do everything in his power to help. However, the villagers remain skeptical, seeing only a child they cannot trust. Sparta steps in, introducing himself as the former butler of Marquis Furcio, and announces that his master has entrusted this land to Van, an 8-year-old recognized as a genius since infancy. D, the vice commander of the Furcio Knights, backs this claim, assuring them that they can rely on Van. Reassured by the presence of such important figures, the chief asks Van if he can use elemental magic. Van answers that he has an affinity for production magic, so they shouldn't expect much from him in combat. The chief and villagers look disappointed, unaware of the full extent of Van's powers. A villager then asks about taxes, stating that giving 30% of their harvest has been too difficult and asking to lower it to 10% temporarily. Van agrees, prioritizing their stability above all else. The villagers rejoice at his decision. Finally, Van decides to start by strengthening the village's defensive walls. He asks Sparta about the magic wall. Sparta explains it only holds while the magic is active and will turn to dust once his mana runs out, so they need something solid. Van asks him to build a temporary earthen wall, and Sparta immediately proceeds to do so. Sparta erects the wall using magical power. Van mentions that he wants to dig a trench to slow down the attackers, but D advises him to leave the digging of pits to the knights. Van appreciates the idea, realizing that everyone's cooperation is essential. If they unite, the village will be reborn stronger than ever. The scene shifts to Teal asking Van what he is doing. He explains that he was thinking of experimenting with production magic, feeling a warmth slowly rising from the pit of his stomach. Van tells himself that as the mana reaches his fingertips, he must sense every wood fiber. He then binds them together to make them stronger, like twisted threads, weaving them with high precision to create a dense wooden block. When Teal asks what it is, he explains that it is a block of fibers, similar to nanofibers. Ortho arrives and finds a pile of these blocks. After Teal informs him that Van made them, Ortho discovers they are lighter and harder than he expected. Teal asks Van if he has depleted his mana reserve, but Van replies that he doesn't feel drained, even though he knows production magic usually consumes so much mana that creating a single item is difficult for most people. He then uses his magic to craft a sword. Kamsin takes the sword, promising to cherish it. Van then creates an axe for Teal, but she seems annoyed. When Van asks if she dislikes axes, she admits it is a wonderful axe that amazed her, but Van feels sorry for her reaction and decides to make her a cute accessory later. Later, Van sits alone, feeling his body ache. Having camped outside for so long without a bath, he feels filthy. He looks at the sleeping Teal and Kamsin, realizing that although they act fine, they must be exhausted as well. He decides they need to secure their basic needs before focusing on reinforcing the village defenses, leading him to consider building a house. In the morning, Van, Teal, and Kamsin are busy building a house. One of the men approaches and asks what they are doing. Van explains they are building a home. The man notes that this location hasn't been used as a public square for some time and suggests it is the perfect spot for the Lordess mansion. Van thanks him, promising that once they have a surplus, he will work hard to hold a grand harvest festival. Van wonders if he is capable of creating something as large as a house. He uses his magic to construct the columns and four corners, defining the size with fine wires that penetrate deep into the ground to anchor strong, towering pillars. He then creates the floors and walls to connect them, finally adding the roof. When he finishes, everyone is astonished by the house. Van realizes his magical power is useful to everyone, though he looks at the structure and admits it turned out a bit larger than intended. And so, the anime episode comes to an end. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button,